young to really know Pilsudski
Oh, yeah.
as a figure, but what do you recall hearing or understanding about his role in proclamations and edicts protecting Jews in general?
You see, General Pilsudski was a highly admired person by the Polish population. And he tried to use this great fame of his and image to create a really strong and great Poland. So in his forming the Sanacja was a party in Polish, which he assembled. He tried to accommodate and bring in as many of the minorities as possible. Maybe pro forma, but he was against excesses against Jews. He was, because it didn't fit the image of Poland, which he envisioned and which he would like to project for the entire world. The older he got, the influence of Pilsudski and his ideas diminished, of course. I believe he died in 1933 or 30. And then more and more took over the Endecja. Endecja is a right-wing part of the Polish political system, very anti-Semitic. You have names and they started dominating more and more the life of in Poland and also of life of students at the university. So there were very, the more the image and influence of Pilsudski diminished, the more there were excesses against Jews at the university. And in academic life, my father suffered tremendously because he was so successful and they couldn't stand that he developed so there were anti-Jewish measures, taxation and so on, but in addition, hardships, really hardships created at every step of development. You know, to mention only that my father supported young Vilna, he had a tremendous love for art, and to create boxes for chocolate, he didn't go to the old style, you know, Baroque style or Rococo or the one. He called Ben-Zion Mirtam, who was the main artist, painter in the young Vilna, Wirszup waren gerade, and he asked Ben-Zion to design a new cover for boxes of chocolate. So very modern we had it, but returning to the excesses. Jewish life was made miserable from day to day. And it started with medical students because Jewish medical students, because of Jewish laws, couldn't use corpses for their study of surgery and so on.
Now, what year are you talking about roughly?
31, 30. I came to the university in 32. My brother entered the university in 1928 in chemistry, and there were excesses. To survive at the university, the Jewish, really low class, the drivers, the truck drivers, and like this, and and butchers and so on, they came to help the Jewish students because the Jewish students couldn't survive in the excesses and hooliganism. And it happened that in 1931, some of them killed a Polish student called Wacławski in November. And every year later, there were horrible excesses, anti-Semitic, every November and during the year. Later, the Association of Students put out an order, the association, not the university, the Jews should sit on the left in lecture halls. In lecture halls on the left. And they didn't let them in. And, but in our case, Anthony Zygmunt, the mathematician, who was already world famous in 1952, in 1932 when I came. World famous because he was a student of great French mathematicians, Lebesgue, and of two British mathematicians, Hardy and Littlewood. He was a big protege. And unbelievably, in 1932, he published the first book, Trigonometric Series, which became a classic of Fourier analysis, harmonic analysis. It is being used even today. New editions are being used today. The trigonometric series. It is a harmonic series. He was a pure mathematician, but it had tremendous applications in technology and so on.
I want to mention, do you remember any experiences of these excesses towards you? You mentioned your professors that were helpful to you. Do you remember any specific excesses?
You know, when I went to the chemistry lecture halls, I would be obliged to sit on the left side. So I didn't attend the classes. I didn't attend some of them because you couldn't. You were thrown out from the left, from the right side and so on. What Anthony Zygmunt did, I mentioned Zygmunt, he, instead of having his lectures on the main campus, on Dominikańska, he took all his lectures to the seminar hall of mathematics, where there were long tables perpendicular to the walls, and there were no left and seats and right, and everyone had to sit could sit wherever he wanted. This is how Zygmunt practiced this. But
did Zygmunt, was he reproached at the university for trying to...
Oh, not only reproached. You see, Zygmunt was not in great admiration by the rest of the professors. Thank you.
If you could begin that thought again and mention Zygmunt again.
You see, Zygmunt was...
I'm sorry, start over again, my fault.
You see, the University of Vilna, you see, historically, Vilna, while it belonged to Russia, was a crucial center of railroad communications and movements and so on. It was a meet between Moscow and Königsberg, between Riga and St. Petersburg and Warsaw, Berlin and Moscow and so on. This was a huge railroad center and system. When Vilna was occupied by Zeligowski and attached to Poland, it was in the right corner, upper corner of Poland, the northern eastern part of Poland. And it was cut off from everyone. Lithuania didn't have any relations diplomatic with Poland. because of the capture of Vilna. The Soviet Union was taboo, and so on. So Vilna was in a little corner, a poor city. The whole travel was abolished almost. There was no communication, and it was a poor city. It reflected also on the university, because the university excelled only an old university in literature. The great Polish poets, Mickiewicz and Slovatsky, came from Vilna. And it maintained a little more. So Vilna excelled in literature, in theology. It was a Catholic and so on. And in theoretical subjects like mathematics, not in physics, not in chemistry, because it didn't have the rich laboratories which were needed for experimentation and so on. And Anthony Zygmunt became, he was not admired by the professors, because most of the professors who were appointed to Polish universities, Poland was created in 1918, after the Versailles Treaty. And to be a professor, they had to use people who had doctorates from Berlin and Vienna and Paris and Moscow and so on. And these were primarily nobility, children of nobility or of very rich people. Anthony Zygmunt was a child of poor people in Warsaw. He lived in the Jewish Warsaw ghetto, old ghetto. His mother was illiterate and blind. He had 3 sisters, and she wanted him to become a priest. But he was a genius from the start in mathematics, astronomy, and so on. And he received his doctorate at Warsaw, brilliant, from a professor who was anti-Semitic and with whom he had no relation whatsoever later. And he was sent to Vilna. He was the Polytechnical Institute as a docent, and sent to Vilna. But in Vilna, because of his background, and because he was a left-winger, so he associated with the left wing of the academic youth and not academic personnel, because there were not, but academic youth. So there was a movement among the left wing. In Polish it is lewica akademicka. And there were Dębiński, Henryk Dębiński, Stefan Jędrychowski, Stachelski, Putrament, a poet. They were all left with Czesław Miłosz. And Zygmunt was the curator. They called it curator. What curator? Every association at the university of students was obliged to have a supervisor who was responsible for the behavior of the students. It was, to keep control. So he was curator of ZNMS, Związek Niezależnej Młodzieży Akademickiej. It means the Association of Independent Left Academic Youth. And Czesław Miłosz was in his group. And they were all sent with not only anti-Semitic, but anti-left political oppression. They were sent to the prison for the slightest thing. And Zygmunt was obliged to go to the prisons and to the rector of the university and beg for Miłosz and Dębiński and Jędrychowski. He would take them out from prison. He had a little power at this time. But then in 1931, the year before I came to the university, he was thrown out of the university. He was removed as a professor. But Zygmunt, as I mentioned, was world famous, and there came protests from all around the world, to the Wirszup, to every instance of the government and so on, to the president, from England and France and from Italy and from America, from everywhere there were protests for what they did to Zygmunt. So, and at that time, a lot of other professors were thrown out, removed without any statement. But Zygmunt was the only one who was reinstated. So he was reinstated. And he was a formal fighter. Rudnitsky, the other, semi-saint, he was the curator of the Jewish Association, of the entire Jewish Student Association. Rudnitsky. His picture is in the Vilna Almanac.
Yes.
Julius Rudnitsky.
That's fascinating.
He was, because he was a free, wonderful spirit.
Yeah.
And what more, he was even, Zygmunt was the curator of Jewish chemist students. He had nothing to do with chemistry, but this is how he behaved.
That's wonderful. That's very helpful material. I wanted to jump a little bit to Sutzkever.
Yeah.
And we have newspaper articles and stories about his famous escape from the forest where he's discovered by the Russians.
Yeah, yeah.
And he explains the story, and the Russians can't believe all of these atrocities. Do you remember talking to Sutzkever, or do you remember the specifics of that particular story of his escape?
I doubt whether I can add too much, but the fact is that Sutzkever was in the forest, in the Puszcza Białowieska, Puszcza and so on, with other, and they got news in Moscow that Sutzkever is there and so on. Now, Stalin was soon to send a delegation of Michoels and Pfeffer to the United States to get huge funding for the Soviet military effort. And I believe that Sutzkever's rescue from there was also part of this scheme. He was needed. Stalin wanted to show a human face, and what it could be greater than to show American Jews and whom they believed are so influential in America, to save a Yiddish poet. And this is how they saved him. They sent a special airplane who landed nearby and so on. I believe the story is correct.
And what did Sutzkever experience in the forest in those last few months before he was saved?
He was not a physical fighter. He was a moral fighter. His wife was more of a physical fighter and a practical person. And I really don't know the details. I don't know the details because I heard it from Sutzkever himself. So what you have is the official version.
What did Sutzkever tell you? Do you remember himself? Did Sutzkever tell you stories?
Oh no, he told me stories about the Soviet Union and so on.
Soviet Union.
Oh yeah.
What about the
He was very close. He got very close, a little with Pasternak, Boris Pasternak, but very close with Ilya Ehrenburg. Ilya Ehrenburg was a superb novel writer. Superb. French trained and so on. Brilliant. And he wrote many beautiful books and so on.
Did you get to to know any of the partisans? Did you, were you?
No, sure. There was Sheres, Defke Sheres, and some others. We knew they were partisans. I didn't know the main characters of the revolt in the ghetto. What was his name? Wittenberg, Kovner, and so on.
What were some of the things that you heard about that the partisans did to resist the oppression? What were some, I realize you didn't experience it, but are you familiar with some of the acts of sabotage and?
Oh yeah, this I was, because I worked at Beutelager. Beutelager means the unit of the German army which captured, accumulated all the remnants of the Soviet army. After the Germans started their war in June 22 and occupied Vilna and Lithuania in a matter of hours, not only days, the Russians prepared a tremendous armada. They kept a huge armada in Lithuania and Vilna and so on. So I simply cannot describe how much there was of weaponry and military tanks and trucks and cars and food. Russia was starving, but for the army, the food was horrible. It was primarily toasted bread, dry fish, and so on. The smell but this is what and the barley, and this is what they existed on, the Russian army. So they were tremendous, and I worked in this outfit, and Kaplansky was in this outfit. Kaplan Kaplansky, he was a son-in-law of the Cholems.
And from that experience, you were able to...
Oh, no, but what I saw was that the right-hand butler, a young boy, but he was the butler of the leading officer, Joseph Zeiler, he was connected with the partisans. And he would smuggle weaponry. I cannot describe exactly which. His weaponry from and he was a real butler. The officer loved him. He was a young boy. He looked younger than he is, Kendelke. He looked younger than he was, but he was not more than 20 or 21 and so on. But he did everything, but then at a certain moment in Burbishka Wald, Burbishki, the forest where they kept the bunkers with munitions, bombs, everything and so on. The Polish had there and the Soviet Union used the same bunkers. And one day the officer took out his butler and announced that he was smuggling weaponry, and he shot him before everyone's eyes. Shot him like it. And this was the end. His uncle was Gens, who lived in New York later and was associated with refugees and Holocaust survivors.
Now the partisans lived mostly in the woods?
Huh?
Did the partisans live most of the time in the woods, hiding? Is that how
I believe this is where they are. This is where they
Did you know when Shlomo Kowarski made the bomb?
When he made what?
The bomb.
No. He published a wonderful book from the Abendkurier called the Vilna Almanach. You have it probably in Yiddish, but it was a major contribution. The Abendkurier was not the greatest newspaper in Vilna. There were four. It was the third approximately. but there was history and so on, and life, social life, and so on in Vilna.
I didn't want to leave Sutzkever for a moment because part of the dynamics of making a film is that we actually need somebody to describe the story of Sutzkever's escape as much as you know it. I realize it's in the newspaper, his escape, and apparently he had a gun, a Tommy gun. Do you know anything about those specifics? Whatever you can recall.
When Sutzkever came to Russia, it was said in the newspaper.
After he was in other camps.
No, we're trying to have him tell the story.
Let me, I have, in addition to knowing Sutzkever, I later learned to know the people around him. One of them was Shapiro, Gershon Shapiro, and he was a contractor later in Canada, and he's dead, I am afraid. But Gershon Shapiro was the master of the canalization, the sewer system. He was knowledgeable, an expert on the sewer system in Vilna. And Sutzkever wrote one poem called Geheimstadt. Geheimstadt means city of mystery. And it was about the escape of some Jews through the sewer system. And Gershon Shapiro, I met him because, as Mira knows and John know, I had some money found from my father, but I spent $10,000 in 1946 in Lodz to buy the films of Wirszup Ghetto, 4 films, which the Poles, after capturing, after Germany surrendered and so on, they found films which the Germans produced during the occupation. 2 were of Wirszup life with the corpses, with the beating, with the children dying in the streets, really skeletons, and you could see the hunger too. And one was after the Germans liquidated, destroyed, burned the ghetto, the Wirszup Ghetto, one of the films which I bought showed how the Germans extracted survivors from the fire and flame and so on from the underground. And they took them out with weapons, and they showed even the weapons, the numbers and the origin, Soviet and so on. So one of the films shows 7, 8 such extraction of Jews. They killed them all like dogs. And the 4th film was of the annihilation of an entire Jewish shtetl, a Jewish little town. And the film shows teacups still standing and have plates which have full of food, and outside how the Jews were transported, grabbed and so on, and then put into wagons, crates with chains and barbed wire and so on, and finally departed for slaughter. So these 4 films. I had some money at this time, as I said, and Shmerke Kaczerginski came to me in Lodz in the summer of 46 and said, Isaak, you could save a tremendous document, because we didn't know whether. And it turned out that there were additional films later found in various parts of the world. But Sutzkever and Shmerke saw the films. They were grabbed by Poles who occupied a station in Krakow, and they stole it from there because they were government archives.